Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today I thought I would take a look at some games by world champions, but not very good games. So I've often covered my own games on here, and also looked at some of your games, and okay, I can criticize this, criticize that, and we may sometimes feel a little bit depressed by our own errors. But hey, cheer up, you're going to see now the kinds of ridiculous errors that even world champions are capable of. Now, to be a little bit fair, not all of these games occurred when they were world champions, but almost all of them, or maybe all of them, did occur while they were already at a very, very high level. So what I've done is culled the databases looking for games lost by world champions, not necessarily when they were world champion, as I said, but lost in 15 games or less, or fewer, I think. So we begin here, and I should say not all of the world champions managed to pull that off, at least in games in the databases, but quite a few of them did. Okay, so we begin with the game between Caro and Lasker, played in 1890, so 4 years before Lasker was world champion, certainly already a very strong player. Caro, of course, is the player of Caro-Kann fame. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Caro had white, and Lasker played this slightly shady variation. It's not that bad. Anyway, here though e6 is better, I think, than c6, because after c6 it turns into a bad sort of Slav, slightly bad Slav for black. So queen c8, takes. Of course, white can't take on d5 because the bishop on c1 is hanging. Knight c3, e6, and bishop to f4. And white's a little bit better here. I mean, it's basically a good exchange Slav for him. So nothing earth-shattering, but certainly better. And black has to be careful here. White is, of course, aiming just to play something like rook to c1 and knight to b5, or even knight to b5 straight away in some cases. So black reacted accordingly with a6, but this is actually a mistake. He should play knight to c6. He doesn't yet have to fear knight to b5 because of bishop to b4 check, and bishop to a5 if he wants, or even just king f8, really. King f8's the better move. Bishop to a5, of course, isn't working unless white plays knight c3 because of knight to d6 check. But bishop to b4 check, king f8, black is okay. White's a little bit better, but nothing fatal. But after a6, now white's advantage gets bigger thanks to knight a4. Okay, so now obviously knight to b6 is a real problem. And in fact, there isn't really a good solution to it anymore. Black's best defense to this is knight to c6. After knight to b6, bishop to b4 check. Probably king to d1 is best here. And now queen d8. And white's up a full exchange, but at least with the white king on d1 and not able to castle, black has at least some practical chances to scrap around a bit. Maybe knight f6, knight e4. Okay, it's a bit of wishing here, but it's, again, white has to at least spend some time consolidating. There will be some practical chances for him to go wrong. But yeah, black is definitely in lots of trouble. Still, knight to c6 is best. The big problem is if you play knight to d7, then rook c1 is just crushing here. I mean, queen d8, queen takes b7, and all of the white pieces are breaking and entering. Well, Lasker found another way to avoid the fork with rook to a7, but this is probably the worst move of all, at least of the three that we looked at. Caro played knight to b6, queen d8's forced to keep the knight protected on b8, and now he takes. Bishop takes b8, queen b8. Maybe he missed that that white would give up this fantastic bishop for this dud knight. But the knight can help defend. It can help plug up the c file. It can help plug up the a4 e8 diagonal. So this is a good exchange for white. Takes. Queen a4 check. Okay, obviously king d8, queen d7 is mate, so the king comes up. And now queen d7 check looks quite natural, but this may be a case of Potzer sees a check, gives a check. The king goes to f6, and it's surprisingly resilient there. I mean, white's still winning, but it's there's no knockout blow just yet. I mean, for instance, if knight e5 threatening mate, knight h6, if white doesn't find g4, then he may really have to work quite a bit to make the win in any kind of quick way. And even here, I mean, there's still some work. So the best move is the one played by Caro, and that's rook to c1. So now rook to c8 is a threat, and even more, maybe knight to c8 is a threat. Either way, it's deathly, and black can't play king f6, of course, because of knight to d7 check. Well, what can he do? If he plays knight f6 to cover d7, then knight e5, and now the threat is, again, to play knight to c8. So, for instance, let's say g5 to play bishop g7 and make room for the king to run away, then check, and mate. Kind of a funny pattern there. Instead, let's say bishop to g6 to cover f7. Well, then knight c8 check, queen a5 check, knight takes b6, and black is just so dead lost. Knight to c6 is a crushing threat. Knight c to d7 threatens to win the queen. It's beyond hopeless. So in the game, instead of knight f6, black just tried g5, hoping to play maybe king f6, g7 someday, though can't do it right away again because of knight to d7. Well, white played knight to e5, threatening queen d7 followed by queen takes f7 mate. And after knight h6, the game ends with knight to c8. So again, if the king goes to f6, knight to d7 wins the queen, and if king to d8, then queen to d7 is mate. So there's a real catastrophe for Lasker, losing in just 14 moves. All right, well, let's see who's next. Once again, it's Lasker. This is 2 years later against Henry Bird, and this time he manages to lose in just 12 moves. All right, so here he's just 2 years away from winning the World Championship, and he gets just massacred here. Okay, so we have the full-fledged Danish gambit here. Black grabs all the pawns, says thank you very much, and Lasker decided he was going to even try to hold on to all of them as well, with queen at g5. Nowadays, or at least for a long time, and I think this even might have been Lasker's invention, d5 is considered to be the standard antidote to this. Bishop takes d5, knight f6, and okay, now white has some choices. Knight c3 might be the way to keep the tension best. The standard line is bishop f7, king f7, queen d8, bishop to b4, regaining the queen, queen d2 takes, with a pretty complicated position, but one where black seems to be okay. But it's complicated. So as I said, still this is more solid. Knight c3 instead of taking or regaining the second pawn with bishop f7 is also interesting. Really, the most typical approach nowadays is to just play d5. I think this is Capablanca's solution. So takes, cd4, knight c6, knight f3, bishop to b4 check, knight c3, bishop to g4, bishop b2, takes, and queen c4. And white can play queen to b3 or queen to e2. In both cases, it's equal. Anyway, Lasker went for the greedy approach, and then queen g5, and paid the price. So white just encouraged him with knight f3. Go ahead, take my pawn, please. Lasker did, and this is just losing by force. Rook to g1. Okay, the best move here is queen h3, but still, black is in a horrible position after bishop f7. The point being that he can't take because of knight to g5 winning the queen, but if he doesn't take, his position is pathetically bad. I think white can even play rook takes g7 on king to d8. But Lasker made things even worse with bishop to b4 check. So now g7 is completely undefended. After king e2, queen h3, bishop f7 check anyway. King to d8, bishop takes g7. White is just completely winning. So black is up a pawn for one move, but of course the rook is dropping, and the king is bad. Lasker found a way to make things even worse, though, with knight to e7. And see if you can figure out why this makes things even worse. Well, here's the answer. Bird played knight to g5, attacking the queen. So forget the rook, we'll get the queen. Lasker played queen to h4, and then knight to e6 was checkmate. So there you go. Utter disaster for a player 2 years away from becoming the world champion. Okay, no games from Capablanca, but Ilyakin surprisingly managed to lose a very quick game. Although this is actually a game when he was fairly old. So this is in 1943. He's still a great player at this time, and this is just a blitz game. But still, It's quite interesting. Okay, so here we have the Hampy Alligator Gambit, which is a tricky sort of Vienna King's Gambit hybrid. And okay, so far black is okay. It's very complicated. He's up a full knight, but obviously white has a big center, a big lead in development, and black has to be quite careful. It's interesting, if you switch your computer on, it'll initially start doing cartwheels in black's favor, just thinking how wonderful it is to be a piece up. But you start looking a few moves in, or even just half a move in, and if you've got a really strong computer, it'll probably change its mind faster than mine did. So I'm not really sure what the evaluation of this is. I mean, I don't even know if this is really a theoretically important position in the Hampy Alligator Gambit, but certainly it's a fun position to analyze. So I would suggest just trying it on your own and then trying with the computer too and seeing how you did. Anyway, Alyekin in this blitz game was not up to the task. Moves that seem to be okay, although again you'd have to, I think, work a bit to see if it really holds up in the long run. But something like bishop to g7, d6, knight f6, or maybe d5, all these moves that are either developing or fostering development are probably okay. They're probably at least reasonable. But Alyekin got too greedy here. He played f takes g2, which is really asking a bit too much of the position. It doesn't need this extra pawn, and the bad thing about it is not only does it give away a tempo, believe it or not, but it's clearing the path for the white queen to go to h5. So his opponent, Francisco Jose Perez, played bishop takes f7 check. And now, big trouble. Okay, king e7 doesn't do anything that's good because knight to d5 check still forces king takes f7. So he takes right away, queen h5 check. Now, the alternatives to king g7 are just immediately fatal. King f6, knight to d5 check. Okay, if he goes to g7, it's the game, but white has an extra tempo. So let's say he goes to e6. Well, then queen f5 is a mate. If he goes to e6, well, this is just a forced mate with no chance to even transpose to something like that. So king g7 was the move chosen by Alyekin. Rook to g1. And what is black to do? So the threat is just rook takes g2, followed by king f6, and then various mating possibilities like knight to d5, king e6, queen f5. So Alyekin came up with the reasonable idea of trying to block the file with knight g to e7. But this is not the best way to do it. Knight c to e7 is better, still inadequate though. Bishop to e5 check is a winning move. The perhaps strongest move is bishop to g5. Let's say d6, rook g2, queen d7, and now, okay, anything's good. Bishop takes e7 is obviously devastating. Yeah, I mean, it just wins gobs of material. There's a forced mate. This is a computer find, of course. Bishop h6, king f6, and now rook to g7. Very elegant. Here, queen g5. Okay, if king e6, queen f5 is mate. So this, here. Okay, if the king goes back, that's mate. If the king goes here, then that's mate. All right, not surprising. There are lots of mates. That's just the fastest one. Okay, so back to Alyekin's move, knight g to e7. Well, the idea is to cover the g file with knight to g6, but it doesn't even come close. Bishop h6 check. If the king goes to f6, then queen g5, I think, should just be mating pretty quickly. Probably there are other easy ways, maybe e5 check, and then d5 mate of king e6. Yeah, so that's pretty easy. So he just went back to g8, and then rook to g takes g2 check, and he resigned because after knight to g6, not only is there rook takes g6, which looks like mate in 3, at least if he takes, but queen to d5 is mate in 1, even better. So there you go. Even Alyekin, who is then still a regnant world champion, can be absolutely obliterated. And really the key thing here, and I would say in a lot of these games, when you get your opponent out of positions that he or she knows, good things can happen for you, at least if you have some idea of what's going on. Part of what makes a great player is not just, let's say, the ability to calculate and all of that, but just that they know so much. So if you can reach a position where they don't know as much, again, that gives you some chances. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that you should play something you don't know either. So, I've heard many lower-rated players, talk about playing something really bizarre against a higher-rated player, maybe against me in some game or against someone else. And I asked them, well, why did you play this opening? I thought you normally played such and such. And they said, yeah, but the other guy knows it better. Well, but that doesn't help. I mean, if you don't know what you're switching to, so, play what you know. But if what you know is sharp, don't play just junk. But if what you play is sharp and a little bit out of the way, then this can give you a chance against a much stronger player. So I would say that's really the time to kind of trot the sharp stuff out, especially as when you're playing way up. Give yourself a chance. Now, the other thing is you should play what you know again. So I really want to emphasize that too. It's not that you should play garbage, but if you have something sharp that might be a little bit out of the way, and it's fundamentally sound, it's not weak, it's not just losing if the guy finds one move, then that can be quite interesting. Okay. Next game. So now we're on to the next world champion. This is the great Dutchman Max Erva. And he was a player known, well, for many things, but among his distinguishing characteristics as a world champion was that he probably had the biggest propensity to blunder of all of them. For whatever reason, he really did lose an awful lot of games on just really crass blunders. And as we'll see in the following games, sometimes that led to very, very quick losses. Okay, the following game was played when he was pretty young, but it was still in the Dutch Championship against Gerard Oskum, or Gerard, I'm not sure if it's a soft or a hard G. Anyway, this is against Oskum. He was black. Dutch Championship in 1919. So we have the pseudo-trump already back then. And really nothing so special is happening here. It's a fairly stable kind of position. All right, here black is a little bit worse. So again, this is one of those Slav type of positions where the bishop came out to f5 too early, leaving a little bit of a problem with the B and D pawns. Still, black should not be in too dreadful of shape. If he plays maybe knight to d7, maybe he can get away with just b6. I mean, maybe it's just better to just cough the one pawn up, and perhaps something like this might be at least a little short of a complete disaster. Takes. I'm thinking maybe bishop b1, rook b1, ed, with the idea that on queen d5 we can throw in bishop to b4 check, and then c6. So maybe this will give black a bit of compensation for the pawn. In the game, though, we played knight to c6, and this is just a complete disaster. Maybe he thought that after queen takes b7 there would be some knight to b4 idea, but queen a8 comes with check, and then white can even play knight to a3 next move, and this is just dead. The other idea is that maybe he thought king to d7 would be okay, with the idea that queen takes a8, he has bishop to b4 check, and he regains the queen. And now he can maybe play rook to b8 next move, or knight to b4. This might have been what he had in mind, but it's simply refuted. C takes d5. Okay, now the threat is to take on c6 with the queen. Bishop to b4 check doesn't really change anything, just knight to c3. So black recaptured, and now bishop to b5. And well, this is already resignable. There's just nothing to do for black to defend the knight on c6. Played rook to b8, hoping maybe for queen takes b8, bishop to b4 check once again, but just takes. Well, there's nothing really else for black to do. I mean, it's all bad. So he took knight to e5 check, goodbye queen, game over. So there we go. He's in the Dutch Championship, but he loses still in 12 moves. Okay, this is a game played a year later in a match in Amsterdam against, oh boy, Elke Wiersma, sorry, would be my guess on how to pronounce the name. Wiersma is probably right. Wiersma has white, and here we go. Again, a crass blunder coming up. Okay, so this is actually still known to theory, and okay, it's an interesting position. Probably black is equal, though. Maybe bishop to e7 is simplest, breaking the pin. White can grab the bishop here if he wants, but black's two very nice central pawns certainly give him good compensation here for the bishop here. Erva played bishop to e6, which isn't bad. White played e4. And now black has at least a couple of ways to equalize. One is to just give up again, give up a bishop, and after either pawn recapture, play bishop to b4 check. White doesn't really want to play knight to d2 here, but if he plays bishop to d2, he loses his bishop here. And black is just fine, completely equal. Another reasonable move here is knight b to d7, just developing, giving the knight a little more protection on f6. No problem. But Erva incredibly played d takes e3, and only then and then resigned after it without waiting for his opponent's reply. So really amazing, and I'm sure all of you see why this is a bad move. If you don't, take a moment. The answer, of course, knight f6 check. Takes, and then we win the rook. And there's no real counterplay here. Like on bishop to b4 check, the king just comes up, and he can take the e3 pawn. So black really just doesn't have anything. All right, so that's pretty bad. This was a 9-move game. He resigned after his 9th move. Okay. Well, 1 year later, another disaster. This is against the famous player Jacques Mises, played in The Hague in 1921. Again, Erva had black. And again, theoretically, he was fine, and he just blundered at some point. Okay, here, actually, e5 is, of course, the main move here. But this is an interesting little sideline. Okay, and now Erva played g5, which is completely correct. Bishop to d2, and black has a number of moves here. Castles might be the best, but his choice of queen e7 is okay too. Okay, and now the normal move here is queen e2. Now black takes on e5, rook e1, and then here black either plays knight takes d3 or bishop to d6, in both cases with a very good game. Mises played bishop to c3, and here Erva could choose between two good moves. Castling is fine, and d4 is fine, blocking the bishop's path to e5. It gives up a couple of squares, so it's not all sunshine and kittens with d4. I mean, you're weakening c4, e4, the h1, a8, and the a2, g8 diagonals, but overall, black is doing just fine. Instead, though, Erva came up with knight takes e5. I mean, and this is just something right out of a beginner's book, but he played it. I mean, he was a great player already at this point. He was, at least an IM, maybe weak GM strength player at this point, but bishop takes e5, and it was time for him to resign. So really remarkable. I mean, the obvious point is just this. And again, you'd expect a first grader to find a combination like this, but Erva somehow didn't in this game. Okay, well, let's see another loss by Erva, again in 1921. This is against Ilyakin in a free game, so I guess this is just a casual game. This one, I think, is a bit more interesting for a couple of reasons, actually. So Ilyakin is white, plays, again, kind of a King's Gambit Vienna sort of hybrid here. And now you should figure it out. What should black to move play here? The answer, I think, is fairly obvious for any of us who have been raised on e4, e5 openings. Instead you play d5. I mean, this is almost always the antidote in positions where white has a bishop on c4 and plays e4, e5. I mean, as long as there's not a second black piece hanging. Like if the black bishop were on e7, this would be bad because e takes f6, d takes c4, f takes e7. But here, there's no second piece. So this would be normal, and black should be completely fine here. Instead, Erva played queen to e7, and now after queen e2, the knight has to move, and then white plays knight to d5, which is pretty disgusting. The further point is, okay, if black plays bishop takes c3, then he doesn't have to worry about knight to d5, but still, the knight has to go back to g8, which is just pretty gruesome. Okay, well, Erva chose knight to g8. There came knight to d5, check, here, bishop a5, knight f3, queen h5. And here, the game got strange again. White just has an overwhelming position here. I mean, he's down a pawn, but he can regain it at his leisure. Perhaps the strongest, or at least one of the strongest ways to play is b4, and then let's say d4. And I mean, this is just, it's absurd that a player of Erva's caliber could wind up in a position like this. White is just dead won here. But Ilyakin decided to be clever with knight to f6 check. And it worked, but it's actually not the best. G takes f6, e takes f6, king to e8, And now a new way to blunder. After rook to e1, Irva resigned. So he saw, okay, white's threatening queen to e8 mate, and if he plays knight takes f6, then he gets mated by queen to e7. The only problem is that black could get out of the mate by pushing the c-pawn, so he can go to c6 or to c5. And now the position is very unclear. I mean, black is up a full knight here. Definitely white has full compensation, and is better if he finds some combination like this. So b4, for instance, takes a3, bishop to b2. So something like this. And okay, black is still a full piece ahead, but all right, he's very tied down. White certainly stands better here, but I suspect that Irva just missed that he could play c6 or c5 here and avoid the mate. So kind of a funny new way to blunder a game. Okay, so now we move up a couple of world champions. It seems that Botvinnik never managed to lose a game in under 15 moves, or 15 moves or under, and neither did Tal, or Smyslov. But Petrosian did, at least twice. This first game is against Alexander Kotov. Again, he had black. So you notice a pattern here. It's a lot easier to lose very quickly with black than with white. Kotov, of course, is another famous Soviet grandmaster. At this point, Petrosian was fairly young. He was 20 years old, so not a little kid, but still fairly inexperienced. But this was in the Soviet Championship. Actually, this was kind of interesting. If I remember right, I think I read about this game in the biography of Petrosian by Vic Vasiliev, an old RHM press book. And I think, if I remember right, this was basically Petrosian kind of getting stage fright. So this is his first game. This was round one in his first ever Soviet Championship final. And he just got nervous and lost very quickly. So we have a very staid opening here. Kotov playing the Carlsbad system, or the exchange variation if you prefer, with queen c2. And now here, black normally castles or plays knight b to d7, and eventually goes for knight e4. But here he played it right away. And this is just bad, because after bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, there's this trivial tactic, knight takes d5, with the point being that after cd, queen takes c8 check. And white is not only winning one pawn, but even going for seconds. And this is actually what happened. Queen d8, bishop to b5 check, knight c6, and here actually the best move would have been queen takes b7, and then maybe black should castle, going for some counterplay with queen a5 check and rolling the dice and hoping for the best, although he should just lose. Instead, Kotov just played it simple, bishop c6, bc, and here on move 13, after queen takes c6 check, Petrosian just resigned. So he can get a little bit of counterplay, or he can almost get counterplay. King f8, and now knight e2. So that way, on queen a5 check, there's knight to c3, and white can make sure that he castles. Maybe black can play h5 and lift the rook, but still, white is just completely winning here. 2 pawns up for just about nothing. All right, so that was a big disaster for Petrosian, but he was a kid then. Now let's see what happens when he's world chess champion. This is a game played in a club event, the Moscow Trade Union Championship, and he's black against Vladimir Lieberzen, who later emigrated to Israel. Okay, so we've got a French, a winnower, and really nothing so special has happened. I mean, it's just going to be a positional battle. White's got the bishops, black has the better structure, so standard stuff. When Lieberzen castled. So here we are, move 14. So you can make this little exercise. Black to move and lose, but not really. Okay, so think of a move that looks natural but has a tactical problem. Well, a very natural idea for black here, is to play bishop to b5, with the idea of trading the light squared bishops so that he can take over the light squares like f5, for instance, and just to get rid of the bad bishop in general. It's usually a good idea. The problem with this is a tactical one. White played bishop to e3, and Petrosian resigned. Why? Well, the queen's under attack, and the bishop on b5 needs to stay defended too. So after queen to c6, for instance, knight to d4, and it's game over. The only problem with this little bit of reasoning by Petrosian is that he's got a good move here. He can play d4. And after this, he's not really even that much worse. So it doesn't mean that bishop to b5 should have been played, but this is actually okay. And the point is that now, after white captures, the queen can go to d5, and he's not losing the light squared bishop at all. And in fact, it's really not even so bad. Takes, takes, and yeah, he's down a pawn, but you can see, I mean, this pawn on c2 can be targeted on the c file. Black can control squares like c4, d5, f5. This bishop on e3 isn't so great. I mean, it's a little bit weak. So, and of course, the c2 pawn, as I said, and the a3 pawn even can be a bit weak. Maybe even the h4 pawn in some cases after knight f5. So black's only a little bit worse here. Rook f to c1 is also playable. Takes, takes, knight f5, and then queen to d8. And again, black is in pretty good shape here. He's down a pawn, yeah, but that extra pawn is a double d pawn, and it's a backward double d pawn. So again, black is not so bad here. So it was a double mistake by Petrosian, again, during his reign as world champion. So first bishop to b5 is a tactical error, and then the bigger blunder was resigning when the position was only slightly worse. Okay, Spassky and Fischer were immune from at least losing games in 15 moves, but Karpov has managed to do it a couple of times. Okay, the first example is quite famous, or at least used to be. This is against Larry Christensen from Wijk aan Zee back in 1993. Okay, so we have the staid Queen's Indian defense, a favorite of Karpov's. And, all right, the one problem in black's position is this loose knight on h5, but okay, it's not a big deal just yet. And it can be useful there. The two main moves here, okay, one move is bishop to c5, trying to exchange off the dark squared bishops because, well, then squares like d4 and f4 and maybe e5 can more easily come under black's control. Another standard move is to play queen to b8, which, for one thing, will attempt to justify the position of the knight on h5. Maybe in some cases it can go for f4. More to the point, it prevents white from maybe playing a move like f4. So various ideas. The queen can come to e5 next, and so on. But Karpov found a different way to fight for the f4 square. It wasn't quite so good. He played bishop to d6. Okay, so what's wrong with bishop to d6? If you don't know this example already, figure it out. Well, the problem was queen d1, with a little double attack. So knight on h5 and the bishop on d6 are both completely unprotected, and when you've got pieces that are unprotected, bad things can often happen to them. So the old mantra, loose pieces drop off, comes perfectly into play here. Black resigns. So 12 moves, game over. Nice easy game for Christensen there. Okay, well, here's a more recent game. Certainly Karpov's not the player he was, and this is a blitz game, but still, losing in 15 moves is still unusual, even for a player who's no longer in his prime. I mean, he's still over 2,600. It's not a weak player. Okay, so this is against Levon Aronian from one of the Blitz World Championships in Moscow. Okay, so here the normal move is d4, but Aronian played rook to d1, maybe trying to be a little bit tricky in his move order. So c5, d4. Okay, here Karpov played knight to b4. Probably knight to d7 might be a little bit better, but all right, knight b4 isn't terrible. Queen b1, queen c8, bishop g5. And then here, black should play f6, and he's basically okay if he does this. But he played bishop takes g5, and this is asking for a bit of trouble. After knight takes g5, okay, there's nothing, there's no, let's say, immediate win, but white has a big advantage here. The threat is queen takes h7 mate. The only decent move in reply is g6. Now here, actually the most accurate move is knight g to e4, but Aronian played knight c to e4. Threatening knight to f6 check for one thing, and the difference is that, okay, well, black should play knight to d5 here. And so the reason why knight g to e4 is better is that now knight to d5, black can play, or white can play knight takes d5, if nothing else, and win a pawn. So knight c to e4, and here knight to d5 should have been played, but Karpov played king to g7. Okay, guess what Aronian played? It's not knight f6. Knight to d6. Pretty bad. So that's how Karpov lost in 15 moves. Okay. Well, surely a player like Kasparov couldn't possibly lose in 15 moves. I mean, the guy is Mr. Calculation. Well, he did manage to lose such a game, but to be fair, it was under very, very strange circumstances. You may remember that he played a World Championship match against Nigel Short back in 1993. And there was a funny match regulation, one that, they wanted the sponsor, so they went along with it, but it's a pretty odd rule. Anyway, the deal was this. They had, I assume, booked the site for the match for a certain number of games, and so they decided, okay, if the match finishes early, you guys are still going to play some games, just to kind of, make the sponsors happy. So what they did was they played a number of theme games after the match was officially over, and even more bizarre, they were forced to play certain openings, and I think they weren't even announced until the moment of the game. So it was they were really exhibition games. They aren't serious games, but the bad news for Kasparov, who was again black in this game, was that he was forced to play this variation, which is just not so good. This is, of course, the line I think from the Immortal game. This sacrifice with b5. I think this was a Kieseritzky idea, not just in that game but in general. And the idea is kind of like an Evans Gambit. I mean, you're trying to, or part of an Evans Gambit idea. You're trying to move the bishop off of the good diagonal while opening the fianchetto diagonal for your own bishop. Anyway, you remember what I said before about the advantage of getting your opponent into positions that are kind of unfamiliar to him? Well, you're going to see that in spades in this game. So Kasparov just has no clue how to play this sort of position, and Short just makes good natural attacking moves and destroys him. So bishop takes b5, knight f6, knight f3, queen h6, knight c3. Probably okay so far for Kasparov. g5 might not be the best. It's often a good move in King's Gambits, trying to maintain this good pawn on f4. But here he can't really maintain it because there's no chance to play h6 after h4. So g5 might not be really the solution in this case. Okay, Short played d4, getting the bishop on c1 into the action, and now h4. Okay, there's no threat to play h takes g5 just yet, but there will be. Rook to g8, king g1, and black is in a heap of trouble already. So h takes g5 is a big threat. If g4, then knight to g5 is just wonderful. So Kasparov played g takes h4, hoping, okay, it's lousy, but maybe he can get some play on the g file. Okay, threatening mate, queen e2, and now Kasparov just finishes committing suicide here with knight takes e4. Well, it's nice to grab a center pawn if you can get away with it, but this is opening up the e file, and black just collapses here. So the threat's just to win a piece, and how does Kasparov defend it? He can't play d5 because it's illegal, so f5 is the only other choice. And now knight h4 followed by knight takes f5 is going to be devastating. Well, Kasparov played queen to g3, and now white doesn't bother with knight takes f5. He finds something even better here. Played knight takes e4, and Kasparov just resigned here in complete disgust. Let's say bishop takes e4, rook takes, queen takes, and now, okay, knight f5 for instance. Let's say queen g4, and queen takes a8. White is up a piece and a pawn, and the knight on b8 is dropping as well. So this is just absolutely hopeless for black. So Kasparov managed to lose this game in just 15 moves. Just completely crushed. And again, you're in an unfamiliar position, bad things can happen to you. Better to have the bad things happen to your opponent. Well, as embarrassing as this is, it was only an exhibition game, and at least made it to move 15. Anand managed to lose a game in 6 moves once, and it was a real tournament game, too. Okay, probably many of you know this story. This was against Alonso Zapata, Colombian Grandmaster, played in Biel back in 1988. And Anand was already a Grandmaster. He was very young still, but a GM. Here, Zapata played knight to c3, which is an important sideline against the Petrov. The normal move here, which was certainly known then too, is knight takes c3. But there had been a game played the year before between Miles and Christensen, where Christensen played bishop to f5, and the players just kind of went through the motions, and it was a very quick, very boring draw. So just to go through the moves here, this is Miles Christensen from San Francisco. Yeah, so San Francisco in 1987. And all right, here the players decided they had had enough boredom and agreed to the draw. So Anand thought, okay, this probably isn't so bad. You can play knight to e4 and just try your luck. Well, queen to e2. And the game is over here already. The threat is to play d3. And on queen to e7, just knight to d5. And keeping the e-file closed and saving the queen and saving the pawn on c7 is impossible. So you put all that together, and Anand resigned here. I think he tells a story about this in a disc he did for ChessBase, where he says that the game ended so quickly that a lot of his fellow competitors in the tournament thought that the game was agreed drawn. And, of course, that was a misconception that he was certainly not eager to correct over the course of the tournament. But, of course, since then it's become very famous that he lost this very quick game. Okay. So I believe, that's it for our survey of losses by world champions in 15 moves or fewer. So I hope this kind of cheers you up a bit. Even the world's very best players, even as elite players, this isn't looking for them when they were 5 years old, losing to their uncle or something. This is them as, if not fully mature, then at least very close to fully mature players, losing really horrible games and doing so quickly. So again, we notice some patterns here. A lot of them were in e4, e5 openings, so that's always a great way to lose a quick game. Nothing wrong with e4, e5, but there are a lot of trappy kinds of positions that can arise in these complexes. Secondly, of course, they were all black. A lot of the games were e4, e5, and I would say the key in many of these games was again the unfamiliarity factor. So when you're in a position you don't know very well, and there are tactics present, you can lose, and that can be true even if it's not a super sharp opening. So we saw some openings that were more or less solid. We saw Queen's Gambit exchange variation. We saw a couple of Slav type positions. I think there was an English in there. So anytime you're in an unfamiliar kind of position, you can lose very quickly due to tactical factors. So that's another reason to avoid, not to play something weird when you're playing up if it's something that you don't know, because then you're going to be the person who slips on the banana peel more likely than your opponent. Okay, so that should do it. I think the point's been made. Hope you enjoyed the games and can use the lessons contained therein. Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.